Today is our third and final program on the historical background of Newfoundland Society. And in today's period, we're talking about contemporary Newfoundland history. And by that, I mean the period in which we now find ourselves, And I really think of that period as starting with the sort of major change that took place in 1949 when Newfoundland became the 10th province of Canada. I'm very pleased indeed to have in the studio with me today the man who not only probably knows more about that period of our history than anybody else, but also certainly has had more to do with making that period of our history than anybody else, and I refer to the former Premier of the province, Mr. Joseph R. Smallwood. So welcome here today, sir.
Thank you.
I realize that recently you've published a book. You've been publishing a number of books in the past few years at quite an impressive rate. And the latest book was, or one of your latest books was about the early Newfoundland reformer, Dr. William Carson, who was largely responsible for moving Newfoundland towards political independence in the middle years of the 19th century. Now, I suppose one could say that in some ways Mr. Joseph Smallwood was a reformer who was largely responsible for moving Newfoundland out of independence into a new kind of society in the middle years of the 20th century. I wonder if there are any kinds of comparisons that you would make yourself between Dr. Carson and yourself.
Carson, I've called him the greatest reformer in our history. I've written a book on Sir William Coker, the founder and leader of the Fishermen's Protective Union, which was a mighty force in Newfoundland from about 1908 or 9 down to about 1925. I've called him the greatest Newfoundlander after Carson, next only to Carson. So the great Newfoundlanders in my book would be Dr. William Carson and Sir William Coker. Now, but they were reformers in a different kind of way. Carson was a Scot, and he was a great follower of the Edinburgh Review school of thought in Scotland. The Scots were very largely the reformers, constitutional and political reformers of the late 19th century and the early 20th. Where am I? I'm talking about the
late 18th, early 19th.
That's right. Yeah. But what he wanted was, as you say, to reform Newfoundland constitutionally. That is to say, where there was one man governing Newfoundland, just one man, namely the governor, and he would come out here in the late spring, the early summer, and he'd go back to Newfoundland, to England in the early autumn, the early fall, and that's all. He would be here for a few months a year. One man governing Newfoundland, one man. He had no advisors, he had no council, he had no legislature, he had nothing, just one man, and he only for a few months. Carson was outraged by that. He was completely outraged. It's barbaric. It's utterly savage. And so he started a great agitation. Number one, to get the governor to reside in Newfoundland all the year round. And the first one he got died that winter. So it looked like a strong argument against his contention that the governor should live. It's not human to live in Newfoundland in the winter. And that was Sir Francis Pickmore. When he died here that winter, there were no ships to carry him back to England to be buried. You couldn't bury a governor in Newfoundland. He had to be taken back to England, and there was no ship to take him, so they had to keep his body. They kept his body by getting a great cask, a pipe they used to call it, a great oaken cask of rum, full of rum. And they put the body in the cask of rum and preserved it that way, and it was taken back to England in the first ship that came in here in the spring, took the body back. Well, he insisted on getting the governor to live here all the year round, and he succeeded. And then he demanded that the governor have an advisory council to advise him, so it wouldn't be just one man, one voice. Now, that advisory council would not be elected. It would be a council of 4 or 5 or 6 men personally selected by the governor himself.
Right.
And he wouldn't pick Dr. Carson, he wouldn't pick Patrick Morris, he wouldn't pick the men that were critical of one-man rule. He would pick men who were pretty well subservient and would say yes sir and no sir as they were expected to say. Then he agitated for, the right to live in Newfoundland, the right to fence a piece of land, the right to have a piece of land, the right to have a chimney in your house. He established the first hospital, he built the first road. You could call him the father of agriculture, or he was the father of municipal government. His whole mind was the mind of a reformer. He wanted to change and improve just about everything in sight. But primarily and basically, fundamentally, it was constitutional change that he wanted. Now, Coker, on the other hand, wanted to reform, improve, and by improving, reforming, or by reforming, improving the state. The state is the condition, the status of the fishermen. Their standing in the community. They were to be the great element in the Newfoundland Society, the fishermen. They were the basic producers. There was really only one industry, relatively speaking. As a matter of fact, the birth of the FPU, Fishermen's Protective Union, in the fall of 1908 was almost contemporaneous with the building of the first paper mill at Grand Falls, almost. You see. So the fishermen were still the great social element in the Newfoundland community, and he wanted the fishermen to be recognized as that, as being what they were in fact, whereas they'd been despised and looked down on before that. And then, in addition to that, he would do by getting them organized, making them a very powerful body. And the song was, "We're with you, Mr. Coker," and we're 20,000 strong. And there were probably as many as 20,000 fishermen at the peak who were members of the FPU. That made them strong. It gave them tremendous recognition. And then he founded and then he got elected to the House. He formed a political party made up of FPU. The FPU selected the candidates, which meant that he selected them. The FPU financed them. And that wasn't a matter of cash, that was a matter of the candidate as he went around from settlement to settlement being put up by one of the members of the FPU. The hall would be free. He had virtually no expense in canvassing, in campaigning. And he elected 13 men that way to the House of Assembly, enough to dominate in a House of 36 members, you see.
Where the other two parties were split.
Yes. Well, he made a coalition with the Liberal Party, with Sir Robert Bond, the great Liberal leader. And when he got in the House, he brought in reform after reform. The famous Coker Sealing Act, an act that was passed by the House regulating and enormously improving the conditions aboard the sealing ships, the amount of food, the kind of food, the variety of food, the sleeping accommodation, all kinds of the actual living conditions aboard the sealing ships, which had been, abysmal. Had they been just, the men were treated almost as though they were animals, you see, by the ship owners, the large merchant firms on Water Street that were the owners. And it wasn't that they were consciously cruel or brutal. It was just, that's the way everything had always been. And they were not themselves reformers. And this carried on what had been before they were born. But Coker changed it. Then, in the spring of the year, Coker, when the ships were all lining up along the wharves and supplies were being put aboard and everything being got ready, and the men were being got ready to be signed on as crew and so on, Coker would go down aboard every ship. Throw that out, throw that out, put that out, put that out. That's not good enough. He as though he were the owners of those ships, and no one dared say no and nay to him because he controlled he had a fantastic support from the fishermen.
How do you account for the eventual decline of Coker and his movement?
Oh, it was so much a personal movement himself, Sir William Coker, that as he got older, as he lost some of his divine afflatus, of his messianic fervor.
Yes.
As he grew a little tired and a little weary, no one was there to take his place. And it was a very personal movement. Now, John Scammell was the first successor to Coker. While Coker was still living, he resigned as president and recommended John Scammell, who was a member of the House, and he was, I guess he'd be a cousin of Arthur Scammell, who wrote The Squid Jigging Ground. I imagine he'd be a cousin. And then he was succeeded by K.M. Brown, and K.M. Brown was succeeded by Charlie Granger. And then you know all of them, beginning with Coker. As Coker got older, well, not only that, but movements have a tendency to disintegrate. Movements do have, great social movements, rise to a peak, arousing enormous interest and enthusiasm, sometimes a fanatical devotion from its membership. But then these members get older. New people are born and reach their majority, and people that knoweth not Coker, and knoweth not this or that leader, you see. That happens. Sure. That happens everywhere in the world. Well, so the FPU gradually disintegrated, gradually diminished, gradually diluted. Its sharp cutting edge was blunted, and finally it had no edge, blunted or otherwise.
I think that conversation about both Coker and Carson make very interesting background to the period on which we really want to concentrate, and that's the Confederation period. Looking back on that now, both Coker and Carson, and to your own emergence as the leader for Confederation, what kind of parallels might you draw yourself in comparisons between the movement that you got involved in, these earlier movements?
Superficially, certainly. You know, there's no use my being a Uriah Heep, putting on a false mock modesty. There is a resemblance between Carson and Coker on the one side and me on the other. There is a resemblance. I did advocate constitutional reform for Newfoundland, but I didn't, which is what Carson did. But Carson went a little further than that. Coker was never greatly interested in constitutional reform. He wanted to reform the conditions of the people, you see, which is a very basic thing. Carson wasn't so interested in that. When he wanted roads, that was improving the condition of the people. When he wanted hospitals, that was improving the condition of the people. But he didn't do it essentially and basically. He didn't do it as a people's man. He did it as an intellectual. He did it as a man who brought with him from Scotland this libertarian, this liberal with a capital L and with a small l. I dare say the word liberal with a capital L didn't exist. After all, the Liberal Party of England was so-called only under Gladstone in the 1860s. But liberal with a small l that he brought with him from Scotland. So he was aghast to find no roads. He was aghast not to find a hospital. He was aghast not to find this and that. And he saw land, why isn't it being farmed? He came from Scotland where they don't have great farming. And he thought that our soil was very good and so on. Coker was purely social, the people. Now, I too was greatly interested in the constitutional aspect. But long before I was interested in the constitutional aspect, after all, we lost self-government. And commission, government by appointed commission, was here for 17, 18 years. And it was then that I would begin to be interested in the constitutional side. Up to then, I was a trade union organizer. I organized 15 or 16 unions, and I organized cooperative societies. And I had been a lifelong socialist in New York and in London, in England. And so my interest was something like Coker's. In fact, I did form a union, the Fishermen's Cooperative Union, with putting great emphasis on the idea of the fishermen forming cooperatives. So I have that similarity to both Carson and Coker.
So in a way, would you say that in your case you were trying to use constitutional reform as a way of bringing about the kind of social transformation.
Well, when I
interesting.
became interested in constitutional reform was many years, was 25 years after I had already been interested in social and labor and people's movements. But then you reach the point where you say additional progress and additional development from here on is terribly difficult. We must change the constitutional system.
This is what I mean by the constitutional
That's
change
right.
as a means.
To use that as the means of uplifting the people through confederation.
Yeah.
Yes.
At the time of Confederation, when you were pushing for Confederation in the late 1940s, what did you see as really being at that time now, rather than looking back on it, but at the time, how did you feel about it? What were really the main advantages that you thought Newfoundland were going to gain?
I coined a sort of slogan that we used. There were three forms of government that were, on the mat. People were thinking about, talking about, arguing about, fighting and squabbling about. One was to return to a responsible government as we had had it before the collapse, before the coming of commission. The other one was to hold on to commission government, and the third was to join Canada. And the slogan I coined was, commission government means security without democracy. Responsible government means democracy without security. Confederation means democracy and security, both. And the argument, of course, for Confederation was, number one, that we had to join someone. It was unthinkable to anyone who was thoughtful, anyone who knew anything, anyone who wasn't a baby or a child or a big ignoramus or a big boob. Anyone who knew anything knew that with World War II now over, and the whole world in a state of upheaval, it was crazy to think that this Newfoundland with a little over 250,000 souls, a little over 250,000 people altogether, Newfoundland and Labrador, that we could go on as an independent nation by ourselves pretending that we were a nation. This is just silly. We had to link with someone. We had been linked with England, with Britain, for 15 or 16 years at that point. Britain was down and out. Britain was on the way down. She'd given her all, her life's blood, to save the world from Hitlerism. She had sacrificed her Commonwealth and empire all around the world. She had sold off the shares that her citizens owned in companies all over the world to get the cash to pay for ammunition and supplies to defeat Hitler. And the idea of Newfoundland just depending on Britain was too foolish and unjust and humiliating. So you couldn't stay with Britain. You could stay sentimentally.
Yeah.
But you couldn't have Britain ruling us and being responsible for the governing of Newfoundland. So you couldn't join Britain in that sense. So what was left? What was left was Canada, and what was left was the United States. Well, if you joined the United States, you would cease to be British. I used to say, it means you decide to join the United States, you want to be an American, you want Newfoundland to be part of the United States, that means that we all go out to the flagpoles and we strike the flag, we haul down the Union Jack, and we destroy it. Now we attach another flag to the halyard and we haul up a new flag, the Stars and Stripes. We forswear our allegiance to the throne, and to the monarchy, to the king. We swear out a new allegiance to the Constitution of the United States. We cease to be British, we become Yanks, become Americans. Now, you may love that country, it's a great country, but that doesn't mean that you have to become an American. Now, with Canada, we can join Canada. It's bigger than the United States, but not as rich, but much bigger. It's very rich in natural wealth. It's one of the great coming nations of the world. Her population is only a handful when she's British. Let's join Canada and go up with Canada. Because as Laurier said, the 20th century belongs to Canada. Now today in 1978, that sounds a little bit sick. But this is not, the 20th century is not over yet.
No, right. Okay, so security would be the first thing that you'd be
The
looking
cost
to.
of living would come down, inevitably the cost of living would come down. The great social welfare system that Canada had, the old age pension was $30 a month for the husband and $30 a month for the wife. That's $60 a month. Well, in 1949, 1950, believe me, $60 a month for an old couple who had reached the age of 70. Now, in Newfoundland, you had to be 75. And what you got was $30 a quarter, not $30 a month. You got $30 a quarter, not each, but $30 between the two of you.
Yeah.
So from $30 a quarter for two, you went to $60 a month for two. And I would point that out to them. It didn't stay at $30 very long. Today it's up, well, 3 or 4 times that much. And they've dropped the age from 70, which it was, to 65. In Newfoundland, it was 75. An awful lot of people died before they
Before
reached
they got it,
yeah. The old age pension, family allowances, every living child, the rich and poor, north, east, south, and west, in every nook and cranny, every child alive in Newfoundland up to the age of 12, I think it was it? No. There were 4, I forget.
It was older
Up
than
to
that.
16 it was.
16.
16. They raised it subsequently for students at college. You would get, $5, $6, $7, $8, depending on the age. And every child would get it. And in Newfoundland, tens of thousands of families, every month, 12 times every year, it would come in cash. And then unemployment insurance. If you lost your job through no fault of your own, if private enterprise, if private business, if private industry had no job for you, what were you supposed to do, die? Well, yes, you were supposed to die, unless the bit of relief, the bit of dole that the Newfoundland government could give you, could keep you alive, you didn't die. But it was not an awful lot better. It was better than a living death, but not an awful lot better than a living death. A family that was on relief, and I'm not talking now when it was the worst of all, it's 6 cents a day, $1.80 a month. That wasn't much better than a living death. And the family, the youngsters, the children, they couldn't get the food, they couldn't get this, they couldn't get that, they did without this, they did without that. They were living on a standard of living that was quite similar to Puerto Rico and Haiti and Jamaica and Barbados, the Caribbean and the West Indies. There was nothing like it across Canada, nothing like it in the United States. Our standard of living was appallingly. The day we became a province, that very day, 1/2 the houses, the dwellings in Newfoundland, 1/2 exactly had electric light.
Yeah.
The others had anywhere they could, kerosene oil, anything they could to light it up. Well, if you're a student going to school in some Newfoundland outport, no electricity, and you had to do your home lesson to buy a kerosene oil lamp, and thousands did it, that was not the best. Or that's only one of hundreds of things you could mention.
If
Confederation would cure that, was my belief, and that was my doctrine, that was my gospel that I preached.
Right. What was your feeling at the time about the economic implications of Confederation? What would it mean?
I was mistaken in that. I thought mistakenly, that a lot of capital would pour into Newfoundland from Canada.
From Canada.
We needed capital. To this day, this day, there are people in the university here, to this moment, who are aghast, who are insulted, who feel offended to the idea of the government of Newfoundland offering the resources, the timber, the oil, the water power, the minerals, to outsiders to come in and develop. And, that's the rape of our resources, they call it. But either you do what every country, including England, well, not England, but including Canada, including the United States, every country has had to do. Initially. The capital had to come in. They couldn't generate the capital themselves. The United States industry, railways, mines, the great ranches were financed in the United States by capital pouring in from England. The industries of Canada, the natural resources of Canada were developed by capital pouring in from England, and then afterwards from the United States, and finally far more from the United States than from England, and finally virtually none from England, and virtually all from the United States. And to this day, to this very day, the Canadian dollar is down in value because of the fact that very little fresh capital is coming in to Canada from the United States. Canada cannot yet, and maybe I think for a good many years to come, it cannot yet generate her own capital to finance her own development. Well, on Newfoundland, for God's sake, where were we going to get the capital? Where would we get $1 billion, $1,000 million to develop Churchill Falls? Where would we get $400 or $500 million to develop Labrador City iron ore? Where would we get another $300-400 million to develop the iron of Wabush? Where would we get the hundreds piled on hundreds upon hundreds of millions, thousands of millions of dollars, fresh capital to develop the resources? Now, if we didn't get it from outside, we wouldn't get it. And if we didn't get it, there'd be no development. And we'd have no population today, because there wouldn't have been the jobs. There wouldn't have been the expansion and the development of those years after we became a province. Now, one of my great regrets was that so little of that came from Canada, but a lot more than people realize. When you think of fresh capital coming into, say, Newfoundland or Nova Scotia or Prince Edward Island or New Brunswick, fresh capital coming in, what you think of primarily is money that this corporation or that corporation or the other corporation puts in and spends to develop this or develop that. But that's not the only fresh capital that comes in. If the government of this province borrows $50 million in Canada, and we've borrowed many, many, many hundreds of millions of dollars within Canada, that's brought in here. That's not all of it, or very much of it, put in the creation of new industries, but it is put in to build roads and to build schools and to build hospitals and to build parks and to build, all kinds of.
Of course, a lot of that is you don't have to repay. It's not just loans. It's
that's right. Well, some is gift. That's another matter that comes from the government of Canada, but from insurance companies and people who buy our bonds. That's Canadian capital that comes in here. And while it may not be used to create industries, it is used to improve the infrastructure, the fabric, our social fabric, you see.
Now, there are some people that would argue, if you take Canada's case now, that one of the reasons why we're not generating enough capital within Canada is that so much of it is flowing out, right, in the form of dividends and royalties and so on to the American companies that own Canadian industry.
If an American or a German or an English or a Scottish or an Irish company invests $1 million or $10 million or $100 million in any part of Canada, where are the dividends going to? If it's bonds, where is the interest going to? It's going to the people who put the money in, isn't it?
I mean, then the problem is, how do you break out of that kind of?
You break out of it very slowly. The United States broke out of it. Other countries have broken out of it. That had to be financed initially by other countries, by the savings of the people. The savings of the people in the form of they have bank accounts, they deposit their money in banks, they buy insurance, they buy bonds. That's the accumulation of capital within Canada. And the bigger scale on which that's done, the more rapidly the capital will become available. But it's a slow process in an age when the amounts of capital required are so vast. There was a time, I remember taking a course of lectures from Professor E.A. Ross in New York. He was one of America's great economists at that time, University of Wisconsin, I think. And he had got his class to go out and make certain studies. One of the studies they made was this. In the year 1900, what did it cost? How much capital was required to start a daily newspaper? In the year 1925, how much capital was required? Even in those 25 years, you could start a daily newspaper with, say, $50,000. In 1925, you needed $1 million. In 1950, you would need $10 million. And this cuts right across the board. Almost any kind of an industry could be started. To start the paper mill in Grand Falls, 1905, 1906, Lord Northcliffe. It was a mill at that time of 200 tons a day, I think. Now it's around 1,200 tons a day. To build that mill from scratch, top to bottom, including the town of Grand Falls, and everything there was, wouldn't have been more $7 or $8, $10 million. You could put a paper mill there for.
Yeah.
When the mill was built at Corner Brook, it was supposed to cost $10 million guaranteed by the British government, $10 million guaranteed by the Newfoundland government, that's $20 million, and another $5 million was put up for the reeds and so on. $25 million. It cost. Now that's, when they began to build it, that's what it was to cost. About 25 million. It cost, by the time they had it finished a couple of years later, it had cost over 50 million. To build the paper mill at Stephenville was supposed to cost about $75–80 million. Today, if you're putting the same mill there, you're talking about $300–400 million. To build a refinery at Come by Chance, just the few years that have elapsed between the year it was built and now, it was to cost, I'm speaking from memory, less than 200 million, $170–180 million, which was a lot of money then. Newfoundland didn't have it. It was a lot of money. But today, you start from scratch. If there's no mill at all at Cumberchance, you start to put that mill, that very mill, put it there now from scratch, and you're talking about 500 million. Well, the amount of capital that's needed today is phenomenal.
Yeah. Well, looking back over the period since Confederation and the economic policies that were pursued and developments that occurred and so on, would you say, in retrospect, that basically we followed the right path, that you and your government and the subsequent government has taken the right approach to development? Yeah, once we became
and now I came in office. Yes. And so my administration of the government.
So you're talking about developed or parish
countries. 23 years.
Yeah.
We became a province just before the stroke of midnight.
Yeah.
March the 31st, 1949.
Yeah. On
the 1st, the next day, it cost just about half as much to travel as it did the day before. The CNR were given the management of the railway by the Canadian government. Yeah. They weren't given the railway, they were given the management of it. The ownership was the government of Canada. The government of Canada then, from that minute to this minute, became the owners. But they entrusted the management of it to the CNR, and the rates were cut in half. There was unemployment in Newfoundland. It suddenly became only half as expensive to get out. You didn't have to have a passport to get into Canada. You were a Canadian already. You didn't have to have an X-ray plate to show when you landed in Sydney or anywhere of your lungs, to show you didn't have TB. Do you know that every Newfoundlander going to Canada up to the day we became a province had to carry an X-ray plate with him showing that he didn't have TB? They were trying to protect Canadians against the spread of TB. You had to have a passport. You paid customs duties on anything you took into Canada. Suddenly, overnight, from just before the stroke of midnight, everything was wide open, and the danger was, the greatest danger that ever faced Newfoundland, greater than any danger we had in World War I, greater than any danger we had in World War II. The greatest danger that ever faced Newfoundland came with the coming of Confederation, that we would drain the new province of our population. We had only 300-odd thousand altogether. And if you lost 100, the year before we became a province, and the year before that, those 2 years, 5,000 Newfoundlanders left Newfoundland and went away. 5,000. And then we become a province. And the danger was that it wouldn't be 5,000 a year, it'd be 20,000, 50,000 a year. There'd be a mad rush out to get the jobs in Ontario and get the higher standards of living and the better schools and the better hospitals and the better roads and the better living conditions generally. Already remember, there were tens of thousands of Newfoundlanders who had been going to Ontario as immigrants from Newfoundland, leaving their families in Newfoundland, going up and getting jobs, coming back for the winter. Now the danger was that we'd lose half our population. So what did we have to do? We had to make the welkin ring. We had to just stir the hope and confidence of the Newfoundland people. And I started this crusade that the great coming part of Canada is Newfoundland. Here's the place to stay. Here's the place to make your future. Here's the place for a young man to grow up and get married and rear a family. Here's the place of the future, the coming part of Canada. Now that did succeed in stemming, in damming up the outward flow of our people. We did. It was a desperate situation, and I took the desperate means. Well, now you can't just keep saying we're going to be the great province of the future. Here's where the gem, the brightest gem in the Canadian crown, is the province of Newfoundland. And look at Labrador, the last great storehouse of natural wealth left in North America. You look at the northeast corner of this continent. Where are you? Go out on the Pacific coast, right north to the northeast corner of the continent, Alaska. Now come right across to the north, that's the northwest corner. Come now to the northeast corner, Labrador, the last great storehouse of natural wealth. This is going to make Newfoundland a rich province. The development of Labrador, people laughed. They laughed in my face. They thought I was talking nonsense. I wasn't. I had great faith in the potential of Labrador, and I had great faith in the potential of Newfoundland. I still have great faith. And what was I going to do? Sit down and wait for the capitalists, the financiers of the world to come rushing into Newfoundland? I knew there was no chance of that. So I had to go and entice them in.
So do you still feel now that that was the right approach to development?
It was the only approach. The other approach was death. Death. That's why I said develop or perish. Now, when I said develop or perish, I meant it, but I did not mean that if we didn't develop, you'd see people dying in the streets. No. You'd see dead bodies, corpses rotting around all over Newfoundland. I didn't mean that Newfoundland would perish in that sense. What I meant was this, that if 10, 20, 30, 50,000 Newfoundlanders, young men, young women, full of energy and ambition, leave Newfoundland and go off to Nova Scotia, to Quebec, to Ontario, to Manitoba, to Saskatchewan. If they leave Newfoundland, Newfoundland would bleed to death. How does a province, how does a country bleed to death? In war, if enough of its people are slaughtered in war, that's bleeding to death. In the First World War, enough of the English youth, bright, ambitious, energetic, healthy, vigorous, were slaughtered in France in World War I, as to make a difference ever since. It's the British character, the British personality. You can't take 1 million or 500,000 of the prime, and if Newfoundland lost thousands, tens of thousands of her most ambitious youth, the blood they take with them in their veins is the blood that we lose. We bleed to death by losing their blood, not the blood spilling on the streets, but going up to Ontario rather than being in Newfoundland, building up Ontario rather than building up Newfoundland, building up some other Canadian province rather than our own province. That's bleeding to death.
What was, how did you see the fisheries and the development of the fisheries as fitting into this sort of overall scheme for development?
I believed that two things had to happen. And it was impossible to say that one is more important than the other. You couldn't. We had to develop, I used to say that every job created is a victory for Newfoundland. It's a victory against death. It's a victory against disintegration. It's a victory over, Newfoundland perishing. Every job created. And so the job was to create jobs, to create employment, industries. Now, how do you do that? You do it by developing every gift that God had given Newfoundland. And he had given Newfoundland great gifts. He had surrounded our waters with the greatest fish resource of all the world. And that's been so for many, many hundreds of years. It's still so. Still so. Thanks now to the 200-mile limit. It was being depleted. You had a fleet of 1,000 great ships coming in from Poland and Russia and Japan and Germany, east and west, and Scotland and England and the United States and mainland Canada, a fleet of 1,000, with the last word in scientific apparatus to discover the fish and to recover the fish, to harvest the fish, and great factory ships. And our fishery was beginning to disappear. But the resource was there, historically. So you develop it. Timber, you develop it. Minerals, you find them and develop it. Water power, falling water, the cheapest way in the world, except maybe one day the sun, the cheapest way to develop electricity, energy, was falling water. You have these resources. You have all-weather seaports. You have great seaports, not too many great ones. You have many small ones, but you have a few great seaports south of a line that you would draw, say, from the Bill of Cape St. George on the west coast, right across Newfoundland to, say, Baccalieu Island. Now, south of that line, north of that line, you get the Arctic ice, you get the drift ice, you get harbors freezing, some of them in the winter. But south of that line, or most of that area, south of that line, you get harbors that are all weather harbors. There isn't a day of the year, a day or a night when a ship can't go in and come out, go in and out. They're all weather seaports. And if the water is deep and the harbor is commodious, then that, in this modern age, is one of the most precious gifts that God can give to any place. Have you got any idea how many harbors there are on the seaboard, the Atlantic seaboard of the United States, where a ship of, say, 200,000 tons can go in? You got any idea how many there are? I don't think there's one. We have several. So these great deep water, large, commodious, all-weather seaports are one of God's great gifts to Newfoundland. And my belief has always been, you look no gift horse in the mouth. You don't look askance at any gift of God. Newfoundland, if we're going ahead, if we're going to create a decent living for our people, if you're going to make it a place that's attractive for men to live in, to grow up in, to be educated in, to marry and raise families in, if you're going to push Newfoundland ahead, you do it only not by depending on old age pensions, not by depending on the Canada pension, not by depending on unemployment insurance, not by depending on family allowances, not by depending on pensions and social transfer payments from Ottawa, useful as they are, sure, but you don't grow that way. You grow by developing the resources that God has given you. And so that included fish and minerals and timber. And now, of course, the thing that had never really received enough attention was industrial development. And I concentrated on that.
Yeah. Well, let me get back to the question that I asked you specifically, the role that fisheries and fisheries development itself played in this overall process. I mean, I suppose some people have criticized the policies of your era, saying that fisheries were neglected too much, that too much of our scarce resources went into other
vehemently,
areas,
very positively, very loudly, and very frequently said it. But the answer to it is this, that we have in Newfoundland today something around 30 great fish plants, employing about 10,000 people. Think of that. That's the largest single industry. It's bigger now than pulp and paper. It's a toss-up between those plants, about 30 plants, and the mining industry, as to which employs the larger number of people. Do you know how many of the 30 plants there are in Newfoundland that have been built since I went out of office? Not one. Zero. Nilch. Ne'er one at all. Okay? Not one since I went out. How many were built by me or enabled by me to be built? Out of 30, there was the one at Harbour Grace, and we lent them several millions. But we didn't put it there. We didn't put the one in Grand Bank. Oh, yes, we did. We financed that completely. We put the one in Fortune, We did not put the one in Buren, though we put millions of dollars in it to enlarge it.
Mm-hmm.
We put all the money in the one at Marystown, all the money in the one at Trepassey, all the plants up and down the southern shore. There were perhaps the one in Port aux Basques. We put the one in Galtas. We put the one in Harbour Breton. We put the one in Burgeo. We put the one in Carbonear. We put the one at Bay de Verde. We put the one at Old Perlican. We put the one, two in Catalina. We put the one in Twillingate, the one in St. Anthony, the one at Port au Soie. We put, my administration, of the 30 fish plants in Newfoundland today, we put all but 4 of them. Now, that's 26 plants we put. That's how much we were against the fisheries. Now, we introduced the longliner, and there are 800 of them now. We brought in the longliners, and we financed them. We created the Fisheries Loan Board and lent money to thousands of fishermen to buy boats and engines and fishing gear. Thousands of fishermen. We, again and again, I went on the air and I pleaded with people. I said, we have the money, the government have the money, we want to spend it on the developing of the fisheries. And please come to us, come to us, come to us. If you want to develop, if you want to start a fish plant, if you want to get a new boat, if you want to get an engine, you want to get fishing gear, you want this, that, come to us. We have a Fisheries Development Board. We had 2. We had the Fisheries Development Authority and we had the Fisheries Loan Board. We had 2 boards set up solely for the purpose of providing money for the fishing industry. And we provided it in tens and tens of millions of dollars. Much of it free, much of it loaned.
Yeah.
So, now mind you, it was an uphill fight because the people themselves were losing faith in the fisheries.
Yeah.
The fishermen had lost faith in the fisheries. And the fish was getting less and less. It was getting scarcer, you know.
Sure.
The markets were bad and the prices were low. And anybody who could get a job away from the fishing boat grabbed it. He grabbed it to go and work for cash wages, you see.
Sure.
Because the fishing industry did not attract people. People were losing faith. I remember when 1,000 schooners every year, 1,000 schooners every year going down to Labrador fishing. I saw it fall from 1,000 a year to 800 a year to 500 a year. I saw it fall to 300 a year. I saw it drop to 200 a year. I saw it drop to 100 vessels a year. I saw it drop to 50 a year. I saw it drop to 3 vessels. From 1,000 Labrador schooners a year going down to Labrador from Newfoundland, I saw it fall down until there were only 3.
Did that kind of decline seem to you at the time to be inevitable and irreversible?
It was irreversible
Yeah.
at that time. The price of fish was such. The markets were such. The amount of fish available was such that people in the fishing industry itself, the fishermen, the skippers, the skippermen, the planters, lost faith, lost hope in it. Notwithstanding the tens and tens and tens of millions of dollars that my administration poured in, I started something, I'm very proud of this. Before they're all built, I was out of office. I started them. The garages, the marine garages, marine service stations. The first one I think I put over in Harbour Grace. And I dotted them around Newfoundland, where you could take your boat in, and a marvelous machine would lift that boat up out of the water and bring it in and you would servicing the boats, the larger boats, especially the longliners. The first garages, not for trucks and cars and motor buses and skidoos and so on, but for boats. I started that.
Well, unfortunately, we're limited in time in this program. In some ways, we've only scratched the surface of the kinds of things I'd like to talk to you about.
I don't think we've even done that.
Let me just ask you a couple of questions to finish up with. First of all...
Short questions and short answers, you want.
Well, short questions and medium-length answers,
all
okay? Right. The first question is, what would you say, in retrospect now, looking back over the years since Confederation, is your main disappointment about what happened in Newfoundland since Confederation?
My main disappointment, and I shouldn't have been disappointed because I shouldn't have been expecting it, is the lack of industrial capital investment in Newfoundland from Canada. But I shouldn't have been, because I should have understood and realized that Canada herself needed it.
Yeah.
And she couldn't give us what she didn't have. She might look to us for capital to be invested in her, but we shouldn't look to them for capital to be invested in us because they were looking elsewhere. That would be my main disappointment.
How about within the society, within Newfoundland itself, sort of internal, the way in which things have taken place? Say, the current unemployment rate or whatever.
The current unemployment rate is not as high today as I've seen it since Confederation. Don't forget one thing. In my own lifetime, the normal unemployment rate in the winter was 90%. 90% of the workforce would be unemployed for the months of November, December, January, February, March. 5 months a year, 90%. That dropped to 80 to 70 to 60. That dropped to 50. Only one half the workforce would be unemployed for 5 months a year, and no unemployment insurance.
Yeah.
Remember that? Then I saw it drop to 40%. But even after Confederation came, it was well up over 30% one year. So now it's marvelous to see what a small percentage. It's the highest in Canada. It's 3 times the Canadian average. 3 times. It's the highest of any province. But it's so low compared with our past, you see. It's not...
Now, when you talk about 90% unemployment in the past, you mean in a very specific sense, in the sense that people didn't have wage-paying jobs.
90 workers...
But they were still working, eh?
No.
Oh, I mean, they were working...
Well, they may be repairing their nets, their traps during the winter. They had no income. They're unemployed from the standpoint of income.
Working in a subsistence way rather than a market job.
They were earning no money, that's what I'm saying. 90% of the workforce in Newfoundland were earning nothing at all for 5 months a year. They were unemployed. Now, they weren't idle. They weren't loafing. Many of them were in the twine loft, knitting twine for the coming fishery and so on,
Okay, well, to switch to a more positive note on which to conclude, what, looking back on it, are your major achievements, as you see it yourself, during that period?
Well, if I could give you a list, say, of 200.
Okay.
That would take too much long. 100, 50, 25, 10 would take too long. I would say it's not the university, although, to have created a university is big. To have built 1,000 new schools is big. To have built 18 trade schools, the only trade schools there are in Newfoundland are those I put there. There hasn't been one since. To have built the technical college, to have put the fisheries college together. In education, to have brought in the school bus system. To have instituted regional high schools. To have instituted central high schools. To have given the teachers, the NTA, the checkoff of their... If you're a teacher today and you're a member of the NTA, your dues that you have to pay the NTA, you don't have to pay them. They're deducted by the government and passed over to the NTA. This has made the NTA perhaps the largest, the most powerful single body in Newfoundland. That's a great thing for education. Education, the Trans-Canada Highway. The building of 5,000 miles of new roads that didn't exist. Destroying the age-old isolation of 4, 5, 6, 700 settlements that were absolutely as isolated when Confederation came as they had been 100, 200, 300 years before. I brought them into the network of 5,000 miles of new roads that I built. 28 new hospitals, spread public libraries all over the province, developed municipal government. There were, a dozen municipalities. Now they're up in the hundreds. Oh, you could go on and on and on and on, but there's something greater than all that.
Yeah.
Sum all that up, and you get this. You get the loss, thanks be to God. Thanks be to God, the loss of the age-old inferiority complex of our people. It's not so bad, you know, for Newfoundland. That's pretty good, isn't it, for Newfoundland, considering it's Newfoundland. You always had the poor mouth. You always had a lack of faith in Newfoundland. The people had an inferiority complex. Confederations killed that and substituted for it a superiority complex. We don't have any hang-dog air or feeling about us today in comparing ourselves. Well, you know, you couldn't expect us to be as good as Nova Scotia, could you? There, that's Canada. You couldn't expect us to be as good as the Canadian level and the American level,
right,
because we're in Newfoundland. We're the poor, you know, little rock island down here, this sea-girt island where we've always been poor, and what else can we ever be? That's gone. And you've got a pride in the Newfoundlander today, in the fact that he is a Newfoundlander, the pride in his history, the pride in the stock from which he's descended. You've got today a confidence in the Newfoundland people. And you've got, you know, thanks not only to Confederation, but thanks to radio and thanks to television and thanks to the marvelous advances and expansion in the field of education. You see, you've got thousands and thousands of people in Newfoundland today who are university graduates. Thousands. I remember when you could count on the fingers of two hands. There's 10, the number of people in Newfoundland who had a university degree. I remember that. I knew them personally. Today there are thousands of Newfoundlanders with university degrees. You have teachers today in thousands who have university degrees. You have teachers in thousands with greatly, vastly superior teaching qualifications professionally.
I'm afraid I'm getting a signal here. I think that point that you made about this change from inferiority to superiority or pride in oneself is a very good and positive point in which to end. So I'd like to thank you very much indeed for taking the time out from what is still just about the busiest schedule of any of us Newfoundlanders to come and be with us today and to contribute to this course. Thank you very much.